I'm going to give a contemporary application of our Orthodox humanitarianism by using a case study from the Church of Albania. Every human person, and particularly every simple and suffering person, requires respect and dignity above and beyond any material support. The Orthodox tradition always emphasizes the duty of love toward every human being, irrespective of what he or she believes, or even if he or she believes anything at all. At the same time, the same tradition offers us the inner strength to discern in the face of every human being our brother and sister created in the image and likeness of God. These words from His Beatitude Archbishop Anastasios of Albania highlight the spirit and ethos of humanitarianism from the Orthodox Church's perspective. We're called to see the divine image in each and every person we encounter and strive to offer love in a holistic manner, especially to the marginalized in society and those suffering from injustice, poverty, and need. The Archbishop goes on to say, quote, "The Church sees in the eyes of every suffering human being the face of Christ Himself. When the Church insists that we pray for those who hate us and for those who love us, it is shattering the conventional instinctive logic that adheres to the principle, I love those who love me and hate those who hate me. The beatitude proclaimed by Christ in the Sermon on the Mount, namely, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God, remains especially relevant in our day and age. The Christian ethos is defined by respect toward the sacredness of every human being, irrespective of what they believe, as well as genuine support in times of crisis without any ulterior motive. This is the example offered by Christ in His parable of the Good Samaritan. It's not accidental that Christ chooses a foreigner, a man of another faith, as His model for love in this parable. He is describing love, which knows no borders or boundaries. This is the definition of Christian love." End of quote. During my 10.5 years serving as a missionary under Archbishop Anastasios within the Church of Albania, and returning there 7 times over the past decade since my departure, I've seen the multifaceted manner in which the Archbishop and the Church live out this vision of humanitarian love in the most concrete ways. This is not simply theological theory, but a living and practical expression of love in action. The setting of the tiny country of Albania, which possibly suffered more than any other country in the 20th century, and one of the smallest and poorest autocephalous Orthodox churches in the world, offers 25 years of powerful examples of humanitarianism in action. As the Archbishop would often say, we are a poor country, we are a poor church, but we are rich in friends. So I've become an international beggar, asking on behalf of the people of Albania so that we can offer God's tangible love in the times of greatest need. To better understand the humanitarian efforts of the Church in Albania, it's helpful to understand the context. Following World War II, Albania became a militant and atheistic Stalinist state, which followed an extreme communism from 1944 to 1967. Like the other Eastern European communist states, the government stripped its citizens of all freedom and ruled through terror, violence, and fear. In 1966, influenced by the Chinese Cultural Revolution, however, Albania departed from all other communist states and became the first totally atheistic state in the world. In other words, any and every form of religious expression was prohibited by law and ruthlessly persecuted. No church or mosque remained open, and every expression of faith was attacked. Thus, Albania suffered in an extraordinary way, economically, socially, and religiously. Isolationist Albania was one of the poorest countries in the world in the early 1990s. And following the fall of communism in 1991, further chaos and turmoil ensued. More than 500,000 out of the 3.5 million Albanians fled the country as immigrants seeking a better life in neighboring Greece, Italy, Europe, and America. Into this desperate context, Archbishop Anastasios entered in July 1991 with hopes of reestablishing an ancient church. He faced the total collapse of state infrastructure, wretched levels of poverty, in a country coming out of a rapidly atheistic mindset and with deep-rooted historical suspicion of anyone Greek, especially a Greek hierarch. Archbishop Anastasios, the professor of world religions and missions at the University of Athens, the acting Archbishop of East Africa for the previous decade, and arguably the greatest Orthodox missionary and missiologist of our era, understood that he needed to proclaim both a spiritual message of hope from the good news of our Lord Jesus Christ, while simultaneously offering God's love in a most practical way. Humanitarianism in a holistic Orthodox manner. Thus, during the early parts of the 1990s, the Church responded to the initial needs of the people in desperate conditions by offering thousands of tons of aid in food, clothing, and medicine. The Church's humanitarian outreach included developing rural, agricultural, and farming projects, while building construction projects which brought running water into villages. The Church opened its first medical clinics in 1994 in Tirana, along with other rural health clinics, while also contributing to schools, orphanages, homes for the disabled and elderly, and even financing a creative greenhouse project in one of the prisons. Of course, from the beginning, all aid and support was offered to anyone in need, regardless of their faith or tradition. During all the humanitarian outreach, the Archbishop would remind all of us who served the Church that everyone in need was Christ himself, and we had to treat those in need with dignity, love, and respect. One outreach the Archbishop inspired was among the youth, a youth initiative to reach out to the gypsy beggars who every week, every Sunday would line up in front of the church. And typically people would go by and offer them some charity, some donation, and the church was doing this in many ways. But the Archbishop said, we have to be creative. And so the youth said, instead of offering them help, let us invite them into our youth center. Let us offer hot meals. But when they would come into the youth center, we would offer Christian hospitality, which meant our youth would sit with them, learn their names, learn about them, befriend them, so that the following weeks, when we would see these same gypsies in front of the churches, they were no longer gypsy beggars, but they were Azmir and Zamir and all these others who they knew by name. And eventually, not only did they know them by name, but they were invited into their homes, and they would go visit their homes. They would go celebrate the birthdays of their children. They would participate in the special events, and they became friends. They no longer were beggars in need, but they were friends and co-sojourners in our human family with whom we were trying to reach out and help. Loving action which treats the other as Christ himself. In 1997, a few years after economic progress and hope progressed in the country, Albania digressed back into anarchy and chaos when a Ponzi economic pyramid scheme robbed the majority of Albanians of their life savings. In the midst of the lawless chaos and disorder that followed, when most expatriates were evacuated by their respective embassies, the church was among the first of any national or international agency to oversee the distribution of large quantities of food throughout the country. More than 1,000 metric tons of bulk food, commodities, and medicines were offered to 15,000 families in 60 villages. The church's aid even included contributions for the restoration of destroyed university buildings in Tirana and Gjirokastër. 2 years later, the Kosovo War occurred, and this war brought in 500,000 mostly Muslim refugees into Albania. The international media often portrayed this conflict as a religious one between Serbian Orthodox and Albanian Muslims. Yet Archbishop Anastasios was a calming voice of peace in the region, trying to redirect the religious overtones. Quote, "When there is violence in the name of religion," he would say, "then the very essence of religion is violated. The oil of religion should never be used to ignite the fires of hatred, but should be used to soothe and heal the wounds of the victims. As for the frightful radioactive energy of hostility that is spreading throughout the region, the particular obligation of the conscientious Christian is to resist with initiatives of love." End of quote. Thus, in response to the massive and urgent needs which these refugees faced, the Orthodox Church led many different initiatives of love in a cooperative effort with other European churches and humanitarian agencies of the World Council of Churches. By the end of the conflict, the Church had distributed more than $12 million of food, clothing, medical care, and aid, while overseeing the care of 33,000 refugees in 2 different camps. I see some members of the IOCC who are here, and the IOCC was one of the big partners of the Church in that humanitarian outreach. As a part of this humanitarian love, the Archbishop even offered several $100,000 each to both the Serbian Orthodox Church and to the Islamic community in Kosovo, offering this money to allow each of these respective communities to rebuild a destroyed church and a destroyed mosque during the conflict. Here lies a not so often an unusual approach to respecting the other, even and especially when the other is a different religious community. What is imperative to understand, however, is the spirit in which this humanitarian aid was offered. Concrete aid with a loving and compassionate spirit. One special project that the women of our church managed during the war was giving the first diapers, medicines, clothing, and whatever other aid needed to more than 300 Kosovo refugee women who gave birth to their children during the war. Our church women befriended these refugees in the maternity hospitals of Tirana, encouraging and comforting them in the midst of extreme stress and despair. By the end of the war, many of these refugee families expressed profuse gratitude for all the help they received for their newborn babies. As one woman received her final food package and baby supplies, along with the money to return back for her return trip, she began crying and saying that she would never forget the love that the Orthodox Church showed her and her family during this most difficult time in her life. Another unforgettable expression of gratitude came from a man named Ramadan, a refugee in one of the camps our church ran. I organized several dozen theological students and university students to go and visit the refugee camps 3 times a week, setting up tents, sorting and distributing clothing, loading and unloading trucks, and simply interacting and befriending these refugees. But before we began this work, our students met with Archbishop Anastasios. And I remember when one of them asked the Archbishop, when we go into these camps, should we be wearing our crosses? Now, we are going to camps where 95% of the people were Muslim. And the Archbishop would say, no, the crosses can stay inside. But let them see the concrete love of Christ in all your actions and in all your discussions. After a few visits, the refugees began asking the students who they were and why they kept coming to the camp. Our students developed friendships with these refugees, and soon everyone learned that we were Orthodox Christians. Ramadan was one of these men touched by their visits. A week after the war ended and Ramadan returned to his home, I received a phone call. And Ramadan told me that he was back in Tirana buying some needed supplies which were hard to find in Kosovo. He came with a neighbor into my office and told me about his situation in Kosovo. His house had been totally looted, but at least the structure was still standing in good shape. His neighbor, unfortunately, shared a more gruesome tale, where he saw the skeletons of his sister and brother-in-law who were burned alive in their home. As we talked together, Ramadan said that he still believed that Kosovo could be a multi-ethnic country with Albanians and Serbians living together. His friend bluntly disagreed and said he could never live with a Serbian as a neighbor. An awkward moment followed, but since I had a relationship with Ramadan, I felt that I could express my hope in the future. From a human perspective, I surely understood his friend's anger and hatred, but I softly told them that such human hatred would only perpetuate more acts of violence in the future. What Kosovo and the entire Balkan region needed more than ever was not a desire for revenge, but divine mercy and forgiveness, which could only come by the grace of God. Surprisingly, Ramadan nodded his head in agreement and said he still believed in such a future. It will be extremely difficult, he said, seemingly impossible, but I have hope. And when he got up to leave my office, he handed me a big painting, which he had brought from Kosovo. And he said to me, "It's not the most beautiful painting, but it's all I could find in Kosovo. And I'm bringing it to you as a sign of my gratitude for what the Orthodox Church did for me and my family during this crisis." He said, "Through the actions of your church and the compassion of your people, I have hope in humanity, despite the atrocities I've witnessed." He left me saying, "Through your church, I've seen what Christian love truly is." I could tell many other stories which reflect the spirit of Orthodox humanitarianism. Humanitarianism has been described as an ethic of kindness, benevolence, and sympathy extended universally and impartially to all human beings. The Church offers this love in concrete action and in spirit. The ultimate goal is respecting the other and leading them into a transformative and new reality. I will conclude with words once again from Archbishop Anastasios. Every human person is to be respected inasmuch as he or she bears the divine image within. As a communion of love, the Church embraces everyone, irrespective of background, gender, and education. In connecting its members with God, the Church also connects its members with all people, since everyone, without exception, is created by one God. The obligation of every conscientious Christian is to demonstrate respect for the divinely derived dignity of every other person with sincere love, irrespective of what that person believes or if that person believes at all. The cultivation of such a conscience within the spaciousness and freedom of God's children remains the exceptional contribution of the Church.